Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and we have a surprising amount of topics to get into today. A lot of different things that have been leaked that I didn't think would be leaked in such a short amount of time. Last night, once I was done with my day, I watched some basketball, I watched the Resident Evil showcase, I decided to start replaying all the different Resident Evil games having to do with Leon S. Kennedy in preparation for Resident Evil Requiem coming out next month. I watched a little bit of anime, and I went to bed. I wake up the next day, just a few hours later, and all of a sudden I see Switch 2 Lite hardware leaks, I see Nintendo Direct leaks, I see Zelda Lego set leaks. So a lot of different things have apparently been happening, and some of this has already been confirmed, some of this is just news, some of this is a little speculative, but there's apparently a lot going on, so that's what we're getting into today. So, late last night, just 12 hours ago, the Ocarina of Time Lego set leaked. Like, we already knew it was coming, Nintendo confirmed it, it was leaked before the announcement, but it was then announced, and now we have the full details of those Lego set. They have been leaked. However, they were also confirmed this morning. So, the pre-orders are already out. Here it is, the Ocarina of Time, the final battle. It's $130 USD, you can pre-order it now, it will ship March 1st. And let's just take a look at all these pictures here, because there's a lot. We can see that Zelda is shooting some sort of light energy, Link is doing his jump attack from the tower, which is a cool little interesting detail there, and we can see Ganon from the final battle. Now, a lot of you probably already know that I've definitely been thinking that this Lego set is another bit of evidence, another subtle hint, or perhaps not so subtle, that Nintendo is gearing us up for an ambitious remake for Ocarina of Time. When that does get announced, it may finally get announced this year. I'm not necessarily expecting it to come out this year, but I am optimistic that maybe Nintendo finally starts teasing this big project. And I do wonder if there's any kind of hints in this Lego set about this game that we're theorizing about here, and has also been rumored. It's hard to say because they could just be taking a lot of liberties here. But, you know, here it is, another image, there's the box, 1,003 pieces as we thought. Here are all the different characters, you got Navi there with her little bubble, Princess Zelda, Link, Ganondorf, the Ganon version of Ganondorf, he even has like the little rainbow tail, that's a nice detail there. You can even see like Ganondorf in the tower. It looks like this is actually a contraption, so you might be able to simulate a little bit of things breaking down, which would be kind of cool. That's just a cool shot right there. Okay, and this is it kind of in person, so you can see its size in relation to a grown adult. I mean, I actually kind of think this is pretty good. $130 is certainly a lot of money, but Lego sets in general are very expensive. So I don't know, I think this one might be worth it, but I know people are a little divided on this. I feel like in general, whenever I see the price for a Lego set, I'm like, oh, I don't know about that one. But yeah, this is oh, we get to, ooh, the Megaton hammer is there. That is awesome, and it looks like you can position this so it can move a little bit. I guess the idea is just to make it so Navi can look like she's flying around, which is that's a cool idea right there. But still, the Megaton hammer is there, and that's very curious that it's there. It's another interesting detail here. And I wonder if there's anything else. Just another shot right there. Another look at Link jumping. It's very interesting, actually. The more and more I think about it, like, this is very intentional that they created this shot of Link jumping in the air like this high up. Like, this is not something that happens in the game at all. Link can't get on top of this tower and jump from it. Which, you know what? Honestly, it does get me thinking, well, what if it is like a subtle tease that in the Ocarina of Time remake, you're going to have more gameplay options. You'll be able to run up, climb up walls, kind of like in Skyward Sword. You could run up walls or even climb up further like in Breath and Tears, and perhaps jump up. Like, I'm not saying it's going to become a fully open world, but what if they do change the mechanics around a little bit so it feels more modern, so you could do things like this where you can climb up on some rubble and jump from it and do a jump attack straight at Ganon's head. That could be a really cool, nice little change, but that's just me spitballing here. I'm sure I'll talk about it again in the not so distant future, but still, some cool shots. I love this Lego set. almost enough that I might be willing to spend the money. We'll see. But wait, there's more. Nintendo actually just posted a trailer for this LEGO set, and it looks pretty amazing. Check it out. Honestly, that gave me goosebumps. It's very, very cool, but we have more Zelda news to discuss here, actually. So, turns out that Sony and Netflix have made an agreement that theatrical and home entertainment releases will be coming out on Netflix for streaming, and this also apparently includes the live-action Zelda movie, since Nintendo and Sony Pictures are working together on this project. So, yeah. Day one, after it's done with its theatrical release, you'll be able to watch the Zelda movie on Netflix if you didn't go to see it in theaters, or more realistically, we're going to be rewatching it on Netflix after we've seen it a couple times in theaters. At least that's how I'm going to go about this. So it's an interesting little bit of news there. Definitely, I guess I would say good news to get the movie out there to a larger audience. Netflix, most people have Netflix, so yeah, people will be watching the movie quite a bit there, I imagine. Now, if you've gone this far into the video and you haven't subscribed already, and you do find yourself enjoying my videos, I would appreciate that subscription. But let's move on to some very significant news here. Sky on Blue Sky made this incredible discovery. As they say here, I think I've discovered something interesting, but I have no idea what it implies. On Nintendo's account portal, there's an unused model code under the name OSM. The Switch 2's model code is BEE. The portal has images for each Switch model, and requesting OSM returns an image of a Switch 2. Yep, that is a Switch 2. However, I look at it, and I look at its shape, and it does give me Switch Lite vibes. So, what is this actually? Is this anything? I think it's definitely something. But one thing I'll say right now, just because we're seeing this here does not mean it's going to get announced really soon and that it's going to come out this year. It might, which would be a little surprising, but it also could be, yeah, maybe some evidence that Nintendo is planning and thinking about these things. They may already have something behind the scenes that they want to put out there, but they're probably waiting until the right time to do so. I definitely think this is absolutely legitimate evidence of new Switch 2 hardware, which really shouldn't come as any surprise. When it comes to Nintendo handhelds, they always have revisions and new bits of hardware and versions. The Switch 2 should really be no different. And when we really think about it, considering the overall economic climate and the price of the Switch 2 and how just hardware is getting more expensive and the whole pricing for memory right now issue, Nintendo might be thinking of alternatives to make sure the Switch 2 can reach a lower price point. So perhaps them maybe being in a little bit of a rush to get out maybe the Switch 2 Lite, which would be a cheaper version of the Switch 2, obviously not have all the features, like maybe lacking the ability to dock and such, or perhaps even detachable Joy-Cons, but having something like this might be a good idea, so you can have at least a version of the Switch 2 for those who can't afford the higher price point, but still want to play Switch 2 games and see some of those enhancements. I think it's important to consider that the Switch Lite came out in 2019, almost 2.5 years after the original Switch 1 launched. The Switch 2 has only been out for a little bit over half a year. I guess at this point we're talking about it having been out for 8 months, basically, a little bit over 8 months. Of course, we're just seeing the first signs of this hardware now. Switch Lite and Pro and all that stuff were rumored and theorized and evidenced for a while before they came out. So by the time this actually comes out, I'm sure it'll have been a reasonable amount of time. Is there a chance it comes out this year? I want to say maybe it could come out in the second half of the year, If it ends up coming out September 2026, not too crazy. And if we also consider that this is the 30th anniversary of Pokemon and that we're supposed to be getting Generation 10 this year, having a cheaper, more handheld version of the Switch 2 might make a lot of sense for that. Assuming from what we've heard of the Terra leaked plans remain true, the 10th generation of Pokemon, supposedly Pokemon Winds and Waves, will be exclusive to Switch 2. So if that's going to be the case, Game Freak, Pokemon Company, Nintendo will probably want to have a lighter, cheaper version of the Switch 2 available, specifically for Pokemon. Consider this, when the new generation for Pokemon on Switch 1 finally came out, it was Pokemon Sword and Shield. In 2019, the Switch Lite came out a few months before that. So maybe this has more to do with when the next generation of Pokemon is coming out as opposed to how long the hardware has been out on the market. So something else to consider there, because that would definitely lead to a dramatic sales increase here. Now, I suppose I should maybe entertain the idea that maybe it's not a Switch 2 Lite, but like a Switch 2 OLED or something like that. But, I mean, I don't think that makes sense. I think the Switch 2 screen is actually a really good screen. It has very good color, it's pretty large, it's high in resolution. I'm not saying it's the best screen of all time, but for me, as someone who is playing on Switch 1 for many years, it's a dramatic improvement, and I don't think it really demands for an OLED anytime soon. Also, given that the Switch 2 just came out, to put out a more premium version of the hardware so soon, that would not be a good look. A cheaper version of the hardware, that's different, right? Most people who have bought a Switch 2 now were okay with the price because they agreed to pay for it, right? And if they release a cheaper version, they'll be like, alright, well that's a cheaper version with less features, not that big of a deal. But if Nintendo releases a more expensive model less than a year into the console's life and it has a better screen after people made that initial investment, that would not be a good look. So from a PR perspective, from a business perspective, from just a logical common sense perspective, a Switch 2 OLED does not make sense to come out anytime soon. Switch 2 Lite does. So given that this image also looks like it's the shape of a Lite but for a Switch 2, I think I'm going to stick to that thinking here. We'll see what actually happens though. Something else that I feel the need to point out is that I've seen some people arguing that just because there's a different product code doesn't mean it's a whole new Switch 2 revision. It could just be like a different color or something like that. But when we take a look at, like, say for example, the Switch 1 Lites, they all had the same product code. Look at this blue Switch 1 Lite, right? HDH001. Now let's take a look at the Pokemon Switch 1 Lite, HDH001. Same product code. In other words, different themes and colors don't lead to a different product code. It has to be a different console. So I would say this does mean more than just another Switch 2 with a different color. But the party is not quite over yet, my friends. We have a little bit more to discuss here. So Hi-Fi Rush has been re-rated for every platform, including the Nintendo Switch, as shared here by Behind the Games. And that's a great sign that Hi-Fi Rush may finally be coming to the Switch family of systems. Reminder, Krafton actually acquired Tango and Hi-Fi Rush after Microsoft was about to close them down. So they had to go through a bit of a shift. They probably were planning on some sort of special release version of Hi-Fi Rush and also bringing it over to the Switch family of systems. But now that they've gone through this transition, we're now seeing the game get re-rated for all these different platforms, including Nintendo. With the Nintendo Direct right around the corner, I have a great deal of optimism that perhaps Hi-Fi Rush will finally be made available for at least the Switch 2, but given that this has been rated for specifically the Switch 1, I gotta think that they're going to have even a Switch 1 version and just probably a Switch 2 enhancement. But yet, we have more news. So if you guys remember last year, there was a GameStop listing that was taken down very quickly for Crimson Desert on Nintendo Switch 2. Well, we have an update on that. We've heard from friend of the channel, Kiwi Talks, during a podcast with another friend of the channel, Nintendo Prime. He said that Crimson Desert is coming to the Switch 2. For those that don't know, Kiwi Talks, he's very involved with the industry. He does many different interviews with different developers, so he's well connected. The idea they would hear something like this, very conceivable. And so this is what he's saying. Given that we already have the GameStop leak, this is just more reason to believe in Crimson Desert coming to Nintendo Switch 2, and by the way, it was said for this year, which is very interesting. I do wonder if they'll be announcing this in the next Nintendo Direct, because the game is supposed to come out in March last I checked, so the Switch 2 version would not be coming out that soon, I assume. So maybe they wait to announce it afterwards, but it might make sense to announce it beforehand in case some people are thinking about maybe getting it for Switch 2, but if it hasn't been announced for Switch 2, maybe they won't wait, like me. Of course, it's also a pretty demanding game, so I might prefer to play this on my PlayStation 5 as opposed to my Switch 2, although a lot of third-party games have been looking and running pretty well on Switch 2, so I'm not entirely sure. If they show off the Switch 2 version of Crimson Desert in the next Nintendo Direct, then I might hold off, but if they don't, then I won't. Now, obviously, that's just how I'm gonna go about this situation. I'm just one person, but I gotta think there are other Switch 2 owners who might be thinking somewhat similarly here, that they really like playing games on their Switch 2, but until they see a quality version, they might be more inclined to play it elsewhere, especially if they're going to have to wait a while before it's even confirmed. Either way, though, I think Crimson Desert looks exciting. It looks like a realistic-looking version of Tears of the Kingdom in a lot of ways, with some really cool concepts, super ambitious. I'm very much into this game. So the fact that it's coming to Switch 2, for whoever does eventually play it, I think it's going to be a really cool game. Hopefully it reviews well, but it's coming from a very capable team, so I am optimistic on this one. And that sums up all these different leaks and rumors and news that have come out for the most part over these last 12 hours, which is pretty crazy. But what do you all think? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I will see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.